Welcome to Healthy Buzz, the podcast for women who are craving honest answers in a supported community. Hosted by Brandy Homerding, a certified nutrition therapy practitioner who believes your body isn't broken, but the narrative around women's health is. Each week, we're diving deep into holistic health topics, challenging the one-size-fits-all approach, and empowering you to trust your own informed intuition. Get ready to feel seen, supported, and seriously informed. This is Healthy Buzz, where collaboration meets unfiltered transparency in women's health. Hi, Healthy Buzz listeners. I am really excited for you to be joining in on this very special conversation with Krystal Praast today. Krystal is the founder of New Moon Mama and the creator of the Tides program. She resides in Seattle with her husband, 2 boys, and dog. New Moon Mama was born out of Krystal's own needs. After having her first son in 2018, she craved community. Specifically, a safe one where she could unpack the complexities of motherhood. She went through a deep healing journey and began to create the concepts of tides. She creates a safe space for all women via women's circles, retreats, and community programs. Krystal has over 15 years in the corporate tech industry, and so she uses her leadership skills and HR skills alongside her esoteric knowledge to bridge the gap between the professional woman and her spiritual self. She supports the whole woman so she could thrive in the modern world. Krystal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So today we are going to dive into the topic of connection with nature and its cycles. As women, we are very cyclical beings. So tell me a little bit more about just in general cycles. When we're thinking about cycles, I know most women probably think like, oh, menstrual cycle, but it's a little bit more complex than just the menstrual cycle. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So this whole concept of being cyclic has felt like such a permission slip and like a relief because it's like, oh, great. I don't have to be on all the time. I don't have to be high energy all the time. And what I'm finding is that a lot of people, not just women who I work with, but a lot of people are just like, wow, that's a relief. And if you think about it, we are nature, right? We often like to pretend that we are separate from nature, us human beings who think we know everything. But really, if you go back to the root of everything, we are nature. And so, of course, if you pay attention to nature, if you pay attention, I'm here, I know you are as well in the Pacific Northwest, we have true seasons. And so we can actually see nature changing before our eyes, sometimes even just within 24 hours. Yesterday it was nice and sunny here in Seattle. Today it's misty and rainy and gray. And that is just how nature works. And if you think about the other parts of nature, like the moon is always shifting as well. The moon is not always full, and neither should we. And so when I first started this work, I didn't even know that there was such a thing called new moon. I just thought, oh, I just can't see the moon tonight. It must be cloudy. But what I realized is actually the first day of the lunar cycle is a new moon, where the moon actually just doesn't go anywhere, but she takes a hiatus. And so I really love this analogy of like, wait, if the moon gets to disappear for a night, I get to rest. Like I get to do that too. And so you're right. We often think about the menstrual cycle when we hear the word cycle or cyclic, but we're all shifting, right? Men or those who identify as men also go through cycles. And there are many women who don't have a menstrual cycle, many people who don't have a body that menstruates, but we're all going through our tides or our cycles. And so it really just, again, it's just such a permission slip to remember that we get to change our mind and we get to shift just like nature does.
I love that. So like something that I think is really important when we think about the menstrual cycle, this is a cycle that lasts longer than like 24 hours. And that happens a lot with our seasons as well, right? Like that's more the infradian cycle where it's longer versus our circadian rhythm is more of a 24-hour cycle. So we are very cyclical beings who have lots of ups and downs and changes throughout a 24-hour period and much longer, like even the seasons, right? Of this whole season, we can talk about seasons of change often as women or people in general, seasons of change. I love that you brought up like the new moon and the full moon. How can that moon and that energy be impacting us differently in those phases?
Yeah, I love this question. And it was really the catalyst for why I started doing this work. Because again, if I work mostly with people who identify as women and who have menstruating bodies. But I really love this concept of, again, the shift and the alignment to the moon cycle. So if you think about the moon, you're starting with the new moon, again, where the moon is totally, you can't see it. It's not being illuminated on the side that you can see by the sun. And so it really just goes away. And so the energy of a new moon is really restful. It offers an invitation to reflect and really rest so you can then build up the energy. And so then we move through the lunar cycle, moving up into different phases of the moon, if you will. And so we'll move into like a waxing crescent moon, then into the first quarter, then into the waxing gibbous, making our way to the full moon. And right, the full moon gets all the attention. It's when everyone gets excited. And it's because there is just such a heightened state of energy around the new moon. Like if you talk to an ER nurse, they're like, oh no, I don't want to work on the full moon. Or if you talk to an OBGYN or a midwife, a lot of babies are born on the full moon. And same with, I know you, because you're in the wellness space with the parasite thing, many people who can't sleep on the full moon, there is some data that shows that it could be tied to the bugs or the bacteria that live in our gut, right? Because again, they're experiencing that heightened energy. And so they're awake in there. And I know a lot of people cringe at that, but again, like we are part of nature. We have these things going on in our body. And so we're working toward this height of the full moon. We have lots of energy in theory. Again, like some days you might not feel that way, especially how, again, if your menstrual cycle aligns in any specific way to the moon, you may feel extremely energized during that point. And so we're building up to the full moon, which usually is about 13 days into the lunar cycle. And then we start to drop again back down into the waning portion of the moon. And again, that's when we start to go more inward. We're focusing on reflection, setting boundaries. That way we can rest and do it all over again. And so again, it can be a really beautiful kind of calendar for you to remember that, like, oh yes, the moon rises and sets in the sense of energy, and we get to do that too, which is great.
So how could you, for our listeners, to help them understand, like, talk a little bit about the women's cycle, specifically around the menstrual cycle and like how energies can shift with that. But then also something you mentioned to me earlier was the wheel of life. So I'd love to touch on both of those.
Yeah, so if we zoom in on the menstrual cycle, it's around the same time span as the lunar cycle. Everyone is different. And so some of the work that I want to make sure that I'm doing and that I really emphasize is that there is no normal, right? We want to build compassion for ourselves. So typically, the menstrual cycle can be anywhere between 21 and sometimes over 30 days. I will just use myself in this example. My cycle is 26 days. So every 26th day, or I guess 27th day, if we're starting over, is when I will start my bleed. So the first phase of the cycle is the menstrual cycle. It's the one we're all aware of. It's when we start to bleed, and it's kind of between day 1 and 5. And so I know that a lot of women really loathe this time. I have started to see it as a gift and an offering to rest and to build better boundaries for myself. But we can get into that later. The next phase is follicular. So that is when our energy starts rising. We're done bleeding and we're building back up to more regulated states of progesterone and estrogen. Then we're going into ovulation. And again, ovulation gets all the fun. Ovulation is often compared to the full moon, right? So when we're full of energy, our libido's high, anything's possible. And it's a great place to be. It's a really great time for play and joy, which I think we forget to do because oftentimes we're like, oh, I must achieve and I must be productive. And so a lot of the work I do is reminding women to play and enjoy that time where they have all that energy to nourish themselves in just a more high energy way. And then we get into the luteal phase where our hormones all just kind of start to drop. And this is if the egg has not been fertilized, right? In ovulation, the egg is ready to be fertilized. If it does not get fertilized, you then move into the luteal phase. And the luteal phase, I often joke, is where the bullshit filter is gone, right? Our capacity for BS is just low. And I also like to say, It's the one that maybe our partners fear because that's where maybe some of the PMS symptoms can show up. However, I'm really trying, I'm on this mission to make friends with the luteal phase because it's where the truthiest truth is. It is where everything feels so real. It is where you stop gaslighting yourself and you feel what you actually need. And you're usually more vocal about it. There's some tools to make sure you're honoring that space and not burning any bridges and all of that, which I coach my ladies through. But the luteal phase can be a really wonderful reminder that we have needs and wants as women. And then again, we get through luteal and we're back to menstrual in theory. And so again, that can last anywhere between 21 and 30 days, depending on what your body's doing and what your nature looks like.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for breaking down like the phases of the menstrual cycle for us. And I agree. I have really leaned into like embracing my luteal phase instead of despising it. I used to like really, really hate it. Again, I was dealing with some different hormonal imbalances at that time as well, but really leaning into like, what does my body need right now from me? It's a great nesting phase, right? If we think about like pregnancy, you're in this prolonged luteal phase where you're just like nesting because we're not having that bleed. So I find that like this is where I'm really wanting to complete tasks on my to-do list. I'm like, okay, it's time to wrap up these projects. It's time to put a nice little bow on it and be done with it. But sometimes motivation can be hard to find in the luteal phase to actually like start it and get it done. But yeah, tapping in, it's that more feminine energy that we have in the luteal phase that's really important for women to tap into. Hey, Healthy Buzz listeners, are you feeling like you're constantly struggling to hit your protein goals? Like, you know, you should be getting more protein for energy, muscle support, and overall well-being, but you're not quite for sure how to make that happen without sacrificing flavor or other important nutrients. I get it. That's why I created the High Protein Power Plan, a delicious and easy to follow 7-day meal plan designed specifically for women who want to effortlessly reach 130 grams of protein or more every single day. Now, this isn't about bland chicken and broccoli. Inside, you're going to find mouth-watering recipes packed with flavor and designed to perfectly balance your macros. Think vibrant salads with protein powerhouses, satisfying bowls packed with flavor and nutrients, and easy dinner ideas that make hitting your goals a breeze without feeling deprived. This plan takes the stress out of high-protein eating and helps you feel your absolute best. Ready to finally unlock the power of high protein without the guesswork? Head on over to bcw.becollectivewellness.com/high protein recipes to download your high protein power plan today. That's bcw.becollectivewellness.com/high protein recipes. It's time to nourish your body, feel amazing, and discover how delicious hitting your protein goals truly can be. So thinking about that, then also like the wheel of life, like tell me more about the wheel of life.
Yes. So the wheel of life, a women's wheel of life, or the feminine way, some call it, is really the way that we move through our lives as women. There's a lot of curriculum about this. Sadly, there's not, at least in my research, there isn't a very good comparison for men, which I think is really sad and maybe part of some of the root problems we are seeing today. But, you know, if you think about your journey, there are different points of your life where you're really strong in some areas and you're learning in others. And so I kind of really narrow it down to kind of 4 cycles that I pay attention to. So the first would be maiden, and that is the ages between 0 and 25. And that's going to be like our inner spring, right? That's the kind of rites of passage that are happening there is when we get that first blood. If we're thinking about spring, it's like when we're budding, our body and our sexuality is budding. We are more adventurous. We are really pulled between kind of the wanting independence, but also like the pressures of adulthood. And then we move past into mother. And some people get a little bit triggered with that word. And it doesn't mean that you technically become or birth a child. It actually means you're giving birth to something, right? It can be your career, it can be a child, but it's really our inner summer. And when we kind of come to life, it is when we are really asked to surrender and give up some control. Again, this is the ages between 25 and 50. And again, like that's a very broad spectrum, but in general, this is kind of the archetype that is having a lot of awakening, and they are starting to think, maybe they're having kind of that midlife awakening or midlife crisis, some call it. And it's where a lot of introspective thinking is happening, and the like, oh, there has to be more than this, right? So, like Maiden, we are climbing the corporate ladder. We're trying to do all these things. We're trying to get the American dream. And then we hit this point where we're like, but wait, I think there's more to life than this. And then we move into the matriarch, which is ages 50 through 70. It's our inner autumn. It's really where a lot of women find that they can confidently step into their leadership role. Again, the longer we live, the more wisdom we have. But there's some true wisdom from, just learned experiences, a lot of independence, a lot of authority. And she's finally able to kind of reap what she's been sowing and working toward in those maiden and mother phases. And then we get into what I believe is the most beautiful, which is the crone, which is typically, again, age 70 plus, and it's our winter. And it's when women kind of go into this like latency phase. They're retreating, they're finding a lot of peace in their life, acceptance, so much wisdom. It's where a lot of humor actually comes up in women's life. So some of my favorite older women are like the most funny people I have ever met, because they've just kind of not stopped caring, but like they've figured out what's actually important in life. And usually that has something to do with like joy and humor and laughing and community and things like that. And it's where they really get to step into these models for society. And so I teach about this because I think it's so important, especially for women, to remember that as we age, it just keeps getting better. And that as a society, unfortunately, we tend to toss women out as they age. And I'm trying to change the narrative on that and bring back this like wise woman archetype, because I think that we need it. We've lost this communal, multi-generational community village aspect, and there are some cultures who families live together, and I think that's beautiful because there's something to be given, and there's so much wisdom at every phase of life. This is just really, again, a narrative I'm trying to shift and remember that like it just keeps getting better, especially if we have the support and tools to know that what we want and need.
Oh, I love how you described all these and like the beauty that each phase has within, like what we're growing through, going through, how we're transforming, right? We are not stagnant people, as we are talking about here, very cyclical. A lot of changes are happening. And I think helping women lean in to these changes and these evolutions instead of like dreading it, right? A lot of the women I work with are in that 25 to 50 age group. And I was just having a conversation with a client the other day who is considering like a sabbatical, taking some time off, because she's like, there's got to be more to life than this. And I'm like, so many of the people I work with are having these like career changes or taking these sabbaticals because they're at that like burnout stage, and they're like, hold on, there's got to be so much more to life than this grind and hustle culture, which is great. Like when we're younger, we can do that, and it's helping to help us find who we are as people, but also like leaning into like who we are as women and not trying to be like in this constant hustle, gotta grind and grow, but like the seasons of being a woman. I love this so much.
I've had this same exact like midlife awakening where I was climbing the corporate ladder. I made it to the top and it sucked. Like, honestly, I was like, wow, technically this looks great on paper, but I have no hobbies. I am missing my children growing up. I have gained weight, and I don't even remember what it's like to feel joy. And I really had to think about like, okay, wait, I think the equation that we're sold anyway is broken. And there's just so much more to this. And that's when I started thinking like, okay, how do I become a bridge to make sure that these women who are also like very hungry and confident and want the career, which is amazing. I want the career too. I want to be accomplished, but I also want to feel like a human and not just a machine. And so how can we create more of a bridge to the spiritual side for a woman so she understands like, oh, I get more than this. I can have this and I can have this too. There will be some compromise there, obviously, and our society does not make it easy, to be honest, but it can be achieved. It goes back to remembering that, okay, we are cyclical. There's ups and downs. I can climb the ladder, but I can come back down and take a break. Yeah, so I can speak, really confidently that I experienced this kind of midlife too. And the more women I talk to, I think it's honestly kind of an epidemic happening of this midlife awakening, which is exciting because we need it. We need some change.
100%. 100%. Everything you're saying is so relatable. Let's talk about how we do bridge that. So you have, this program called Tides. Talk to me about what the definition of tides is as a concept of like these highs and lows.
Yeah. So when I started doing this work for myself, again, when I was at the top of the ladder and I was like, wait, I want to come back down. I don't like it up here. I started just thinking about like, okay, what is going on? And why is it that some days I feel great and like I have all the energy in the world, and then some days I just can't get out of bed? What is going on here? And so what I started to do is I just started to, it's so simple, but so difficult as well. It is checking in with yourself and asking, how do I feel and what do I need? It's very simple, but it's like finding the 5 minutes is often the hardest part for so many women who are just go, 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 or in this state of depression where they just like can't find the motivation to even lift up their head, which I have been there. And so I started thinking about every day, okay, even though I'm paying attention to where my cycle is, great. I was tracking it, but I wasn't doing anything with it. And I wasn't asking myself, oh, wait, what does this mean? And what does my body actually need? And so I started thinking, I feel like a crazy person. And I often say that, like, no, we are not crazy. We are cyclical, but we are ignoring the signals that our bodies and our minds and the inner voices are sending us. And we're just continuing to perpetuate the grind and the vicious cycle. And so when I think about my tides, a low tide, for example, could be, your menstrual phase or your luteal phase, or it could just be a rainy day where you just have a little bit of low energy. A high tide, on the other hand, could be, yes, your ovulatory phase. It could be a day where you have a ton of energy, where the sun is shining. But what I'm really trying to emphasize is like low does not equal bad and high does not equal good. There are some days we're going to feel like we're in a low tide, and that just means we need different tools than we would when we're in a high tide. There are what I also call the rough seas. So the rough sea of a low tide would be what I call my depressive state or my pit of despair. And that is like when you get into this point where you're truly maybe clinically depressed, where you're just lost all hope and it's really hard to like come up for air. On the flip side, the rough sea of the high tide would be what I call my manic state, where I am using my high energy to be so productive that I'm just burning myself out. And then that vicious cycle just keeps going, right? I'm working, 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 working. I'm forgetting to play. I'm forgetting to do things that I actually enjoy. I'm a machine, right? And so I'm in this manic state. There's different voices in my head of like, we got to do this. We have to achieve. And then you get a migraine and you're in bed for 5 days in my case. And so the tides is really understanding how do we find the beauty in each phase, whether it's high or low, and how do we make sure that we have the tools when we are in one of those rough sea states to find a little bit more balance. We're not meant to just be happy all the time. That is never a goal that I will ever give anyone. We are meant to be cyclical. We are allowed to feel different every single day, even if it doesn't make sense on paper. So, for example, there are some days that you might be ovulating and the sun may be out and you might just be really tired. And instead of beating ourselves up about that, can we find compassion and say, oh, I'm allowed to feel this way and here's what I need. And so, yeah, again, just really finding the beauty and the invitations in those highs and lows, and then giving ourselves tools for how we stay kind of in that safe, like fun, drifty kind of state. And then the tools that we need to really help us, like a life raft, right? To get us out of those rough seas.
So, one thing that you mentioned was like this really checking in with yourself, seeing how you are doing. For a lot of women, this is a new concept, right? Because they are caring for others, whether they're family or aging parents, or they're just caring for their career because, again, that corporate ladder or whatever, they might be at the peak of their career. And that's not something that is necessarily a bad thing. I think we really need to emphasize that it's okay to have this drive and this passion and this determination to be really successful too. But how does somebody start checking in with themselves? Because this can be really scary sometimes if they have never done it, and it can feel kind of like maybe a sense of like guilt or a sense of like not accomplishing things on their to-do list if they take a little bit of time for themselves and checking in. How do we
Yeah.
get women there?
I know the guilt thing is so rough, especially for moms, especially for women. And one of the activities, which I know you've sat through before, that I have women do is actually define how they actually want to feel at the end of the day. And so one of the exercises that I do is called living in alignment with your values. Before you can even start doing the work, it's really important to remember what you actually want out of this life. And so one of the activities that I do is really helping women get clear about how they want to feel at the end of the day. And many women kind of cringe at the values or like setting boundaries work because it feels like another thing they have to do, right? And so what I really like to do is I want them to think about, okay, how do we take the pressure off? At the end of the day, how do you just want to feel? And it's okay that if you also feel tired or want to give up, like that's okay. But can we set some sort of threshold for what you desire out of life, which is another triggering word for women? And so I've actually adapted an exercise from Pooja Lakshman, who wrote the book Real Self Care. And it's a fun exercise where I lead these women through a meditation where I ask them to imagine that they get to do something fun, like throw a dinner party, and they have $200 to throw this dinner party. And I just guide them through this visualization where they get to plan and think about, what would I spend this money on? What are the people doing? What is the aesthetic like? Where is this party? What are we eating? Or is there food even? And it's just, again, a really just fun activity for women to do. And I often joke that when I'm watching the women, because their eyes are usually closed, their smiles, some people are like humming or like dancing along to their, fantasy music in their head. And then once they come out of the meditation, we talk about, okay, what did you spend your money on? What was really important to you in this activity, in this visualization? And how did you feel? Like, how did you actually feel to be in that space where it was the perfect setting for you? And so a lot of women say things like, oh, I just felt authentic. I felt like I could be myself. I felt really grounded. I feel like I didn't have to like make all these decisions. I just got to exist. Some women felt very free. So that's one of my values. It's freedom. With my dinner party, there's not a lot of structure. There's, some people having deep conversation in one area of the backyard. There's others maybe dancing. There's other maybe sitting and just like eating a meal that's like all tapas. Like there's no rules, but everyone feels so safe. They feel grounded. They feel like they can be themselves, including me. And that's the most important part. And so when we start to think about, for me, freedom is a value of mine. I have to think about, what are the things in my life that help me feel free? And that doesn't mean I'm just going to get out of all of my grown-up obligations. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to pay my bills. Like, we still have to adult, right? We still have to do the things. We still have to pay our taxes. But can I add in things to my life that help me feel free? And so sometimes that is a conversation with my partner. Sometimes that's a conversation with my manager around, hey, this is really important to me. And then the harder part is, what are the things that are showing up in your life that make you feel the opposite of free? So we also really focus on the shadow side of our values, which often come down to being like our pet peeves or our triggers in life. And so when I think about my freedom value, the shadow side of that is trapped. So what are the things in my life that make me feel trapped? I know that I am triggered, and I know that when I feel trapped, I fight, and I either end up in a manic state or in a depressed state. And so once I have that tool and I know what my values are, I then write down actual activities that I know help me feel free. And so going for a walk always helps me feel free. Calling a friend also makes me feel free. Sometimes just zooming out and thinking about, okay, wait, I feel way like I'm focusing way too much on this one specific thing that I need to do. But wait, what's the big picture here? And so one of the activities that I do is I need to go somewhere where I feel really small. And so usually I end up like at the ocean where I'm like, oh, okay, none of this matters really, and I'm
Yeah.
free. And so once we start to identify those foundations of values and boundaries, we understand, okay, what should we say yes to? What should we say no more to? And how do we find a little bit more balance between those things? And then we start to layer on, we use those things in our check-ins, right? A check-in can take 30 seconds. It's like, okay, how am I feeling today? Am I feeling free? Am I feeling trapped? What are some of the things that I know that I can do to help me?
It doesn't have to look like this full meditation where you're like levitating and like clearing your mind. It can really just be even in the moment of like, oh, I'm feeling triggered by this thing. What does this mean? And what do I need to do to feel better? And so, again, sometimes it can just be like 3 deep breaths. Sometimes we just like overcomplicate all of these things and we think it has to be this full system and equation. And one of the things I do have the women in my program do is actually make a map for themselves where they're tracking their low and high tide and where they write in their values and they write versions of the activities that would support them in a low tide versus a high tide. So something like going for a walk is always on my list, no matter if it's a low or a high. But maybe if I'm in a high tide, I'll add a weighted vest or I'll go for a hike instead of just like a lovely meandering garden walk or like a flat trail, along the water. It can look different based off of what you need. There's also aspects for me where I know that I always need community, but community can be different. The activities, can look different if I'm in a low tide or a high tide. So maybe my connection activity in a low tide is just texting a friend and saying, hi, I'm thinking about you. That feels good for me. That raises my frequency versus if I'm in a high tide, hey, let's meet up for drinks. Hey, come over. Let's have this dinner party we've been dreaming of, which I'm actually doing tonight, which I'm very excited with a few girlfriends.
Amazing.
So again, we don't have to overcomplicate it, but it is really nice to have some of these tools. That way, if you are in one of those rough seas, you can literally point to a piece of paper and say, oh, my highest self or my intuition when I was in a very healthy state told me that this would feel really good for me when I end up here. So let's trust that and just do it, right? And I think that part of this work, there is a level of like tough love, right? I would love to believe that we could just live in a world where we can rest all the time and we can just expect for things to change. But one of the most helpful things for me to get out of that more depressive state is a little bit of tough love and activation of like, wait, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be stuck here. Again, how can I change my frequency by just 1%? And then 1% again, and 1%. Doesn't have to be this big jump.
I love that. I love that. I think often when we think about just starting something new or trying something different, whether it's with being more intentional of your cycles, your high tides, your low tides, whether you're starting a new workout routine or eating and feeling your body in a different way, we can get paralyzed by the overwhelm of thinking that this needs to take an enormous amount of time and we have to do all the things at once instead of like breaking it down into these small little steps. So I love that. Like, what can I do to raise my frequency by 1%? You're not trying to raise it by 50% or 100%. You're like, what's 1%? What does that look like? And so you're tapping back into your tools of what you've created, what you've mapped out for yourself to know what your body needs in those times to feel supported. So it sounds like it leads a lot into your Tides program. So tell me a little bit about, and the listeners, a little bit about the Tide program that you offer, what that looks like, when is your next cohort starting up, and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. I actually kind of previewed the curriculum at a retreat that I had last winter, and the retreat was actually called Tides, and we did a deep dive through the curriculum as it existed at that time, and I got just such resounding feedback. I've also created this curriculum in partnership with my therapist because she witnessed me like creating these tools for myself, and then it would work. And she was just like, you need to package this up. So many women could benefit from this. So I was like, yeah, I want to. And so the Tides program, how it will be offered, looks a few different ways. So everything will kick off in September. So we're going to get through kind of the high energy of summer, and kind of when back to school starts, we will also go to school ourselves, right? We're going to dedicate more time to ourselves. And so in September, there will be a few different offerings. The one I'm very excited about is the group program. So I'm looking right now for my kind of founding group to go through this. It's a 12-week program. It includes weekly calls where we will learn about things like the moon cycles, the feminine wheel. We'll learn about different things that might be going inside of our heads. Like, I implement a lot of parts work into the program where we actually think about, wait, when I'm in a low tide, which part of me is coming up? Who's talking? Versus when I'm in a high tide, which part of me is coming up? And how do we have conversations with her to make sure she can kind of take the back seat and that my highest self or intuition is driving? And so we'll learn about those things in community. We'll do a little bit more of like a sharing. So we'll share together as a community. It's a smaller group, so 6 to 8 women in each cohort. And then in that same week, each participant gets one-on-one kind of mentorship from me, where we really start to create these tools for her. And because I have a background in organizational development and HR, if they have a job, if they work, a 9 to 5 or even not, I can help them develop these tools and start to experiment a little bit like in their workplace. And so it's guided all along via community, but also one-on-one support. And so again, it's 12 weeks because we want to make sure we're tracking trends, we're tracking patterns, so we can maybe build a little bit of predictability, although we know there's no such thing, right? But it's really to feel supported. So again, we go through kind of the tides of nature, we go through the tides of women, and then we develop all the tools when we start to think about the tides of you. And so it's a virtual setting. However, if I can get enough women who are in Seattle, I'm happy to do in-person coaching or in-person community meetups. And so that's the guided kind of community program. I'll also have the program in like a full-on digital course that will be completely self-led, which will be wonderful. It'll be the same curriculum, but it will, it'll be on your own. And so part of this work that I'm very excited about is the community aspect, because so many women right now feel isolated. They feel like so many of these experiences are only happening to them. They feel crazy. Again, they feel alone. So I'm really excited about the community aspect, but also recognize that some don't want that. And then I also offer just like completely one-on-one support as well, where I will take you through the curriculum one-on-one. We'll do the coaching one-on-one. It's totally tailored to whatever you need. But again, that kicks off in September, and I'm really excited to find my founding cohort. I'm discounting the price for this first group. And yeah, I'm really, really excited. I know that it's going to help a lot of women.
That sounds so incredible. Krystal, how can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I do most of my kind of marketing, if you will, on Instagram. So you can find me at New Moon Mama Retreat. You can also find me at newmoonmamaretreat.com. Those are the 2 places. I am looking to branch out and create a little bit more of a social network safety net, if you will, just with the uncertainty of Instagram and all of those things. So hopefully I will have a Blue Sky account soon and a Substack. The other place you will be able to find me when this airs is on Insight Timer. So I am currently recording a Tides 30-day check-in meditation program, which will be free. And so if you go on Insight Timer and search for New Moon Mama, there will be daily questions that you can ask yourself, and they will really offer up again an invitation on how you can check in with yourself depending on whether you're high or low or anywhere in between. So I'm very excited about that as well. It'll be a free resource.
That sounds amazing. I can't wait to check it out. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, Krystal, this has been really enlightening. I know that I've walked away with a ton of great information and a desire to learn more. So I hope everybody takes advantage of the free offer that Krystal also has for you. You can find that in the show notes here, but definitely give Krystal a follow, check in with her, and let's all listen to her meditations.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Healthy Buzz. I hope this conversation has left you feeling seen, supported, and ready to take the next step in your health journey. Love what you heard? Make sure you subscribe to Healthy Buzz so you never miss an honest conversation. And if you found this valuable, please take a moment to leave a review. I truly appreciate it. For exclusive weekly tips and holistic strategies, be sure to subscribe to my weekly newsletter. The link is in the show notes. Remember, this isn't just nutrition, it's permission to trust your body. I'll catch you on the next episode of Healthy Buzz.